Hello and welcome into this edition of Sports Talk Live Buffalo Plus. I'm Jonathan Acosta, joined here by the Hall of Famer Vic Carucci. Vic, we just had Memorial Day. The sun is outside. Bills on the field. It's starting to feel a little bit like summer, right?
It's feeling a little bit like summer, and I'm feeling a little awkward because these lead spots have rightfully been occupied by our great friend Paul Hamilton because the Sabres were the topic. Now they're on the golf course, and it's time to talk a little football.
They're on the golf course as, again, the Bills are on the field. OTAs continuing. They're about 2/3 of the way through right now. And this week, we got to hear from defensive coordinator Jim Leonhard for the first time, really since that introduction back in February. I know a lot of people excited about this defense, excited to hear what Leonhard had to say. Now a few months on the job, starting to really mold what this 3-4 defense will look like in its first year. And Vic, based off what he said, what some of the players have said, it really feels like this defense is going to have a different look to it than the Sean McDermott defense, namely in some of the schematic stuff and how aggressive simply overall they're going to be.
I think, it's going to be significantly different. The question, of course, is, how soon will we see the major change? But I believe a major change is in the wind. And when I say in the wind, I mean, I think they obviously have to have components of it ready to go by the start of the season, but I think more will be added and more indoctrinated. What is important to note, and Jim Leonhard understands this, as does Joe Brady, the head coach, it's hard to force feed everybody, the incumbents especially, everything that's new. Change is a challenge, and it has to be things have to be understood. There's a feeling of, okay, this is fresh, this is different, there's excitement around that. But there's also some anxiety, some uncertainty as to what it will be. And that's why I think of all the areas of this team, these off-season workouts, the orientation that these are all about, typically the defense is the key.
Well, especially when you compare sort of the continuity on offense compared to the change on defense, right? That's why Jim Leonhard said that this time of year he's throwing as much as he can at all these players, seeing what they're able to absorb, and then sort of going from there. But he admitted that this defense in year one may not be eventually what he wants it to look like. And in terms of just this season, it's going to look a lot different week 1 than maybe it does week 10, week 15.
Yeah, and that's why, is it an overstatement to say it'll be a piecemeal approach? But I think it could very well be, Jonathan. And look, there's two types of learning going on. There is the learning that Jim Leonhard is doing, or I should say the players are doing, of Jim Leonhard's defense and of Jim Leonhard. They're learning him and trying to understand what he's all about. And then Jim Leonhard is learning them. Yeah. How much can they handle? Who fits, and where and how, and what is their process like? Every player has a different learning process, and coaches who are good at what they do understand this. You don't try to coach every player the same way.
And two players who have been key to the Bills' defense in the past, and they're certainly going to continue to be under Leonhard, are Ed Oliver and Terrell Bernard. Both dealt with injuries last year, but Vic, I think we both agree that if both can be healthy this year, they could be two key guys set to flourish in this new scheme.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in how Ed Oliver adjusts to this, because having that interior defensive lineman be impactful in different ways than Ed Oliver was impactful under Sean McDermott is going to be so important. He has talked a lot. He talked with reporters, and Jim Leonhard has talked about this, about Oliver having more freedom to do some things, not being as confined to the role that he had in a base 4-3 type of look that Sean McDermott had in place. So what does it mean? I mean, they're still going to want him to be penetrating, getting pressure on the quarterback. Where I have my concern with Ed Oliver, he's not the biggest guy to be in the middle. He is, this smaller, type player who I think has to get by still as much on quickness, anticipation, and as much as anything, understand what this defense is all about and understand what he's supposed to be doing in it. And he's admitted, Jonathan, that look, it's new, it's not easy, change is not easy, but it can be good.
That's right. And then we look also at a guy like Terrell Bernard, not just sort of the on-field responsibilities, but also the locker room, the leadership, the captaincy. But it's hard to do all of that when you're not on the field. He struggled to be on the field here really the past couple years. But when he is on the field this year, maybe this defense may be a little bit more tailored to what he wants to do in terms of blitzing and being aggressive, and it may be even a little more sticky in man coverage potentially?
Yeah, I think we're going to see, because that is what the ask is, and he's got to get used to that. I'm sure he's excited about it. It's a chance to be more of a playmaker, more impactful. But like you said, when we're looking at Ed Oliver here, it's also about staying healthy. I mean, he hasn't been a participant heavily in these off-season workouts. I think more precautionary. Terrell Bernard, trying to get back in the flow of it. And like you said, he's the locker room leader in many ways. He is kind of supposed to be that commander on the field. Jim Leonhard has to have a guy he can trust with the relaying of all those plays and all the adjustments, signals, all the adjustments that the defense is doing relative to what the offense shows.
Now, in terms of young guys, one of the most talked about picks from this year's draft for the Bills was clearly second-round corner Davison Igbinosun out of Ohio State, commonly referred to by the team and media as IGB. What made that pick, though, interesting, right, Vic, is that the Bills addressed that very same position in the first round last draft with Max Hairston. But in listening to Leonhard speak this week, I think the fact is very clear that this year's pick at corner has not as much to do with Hairston himself as much as how much they wanted depth at that position.
Look, I understand that. Explaining it as needing to enhance depth. We heard the same thing from Brandon Beane. I fully buy that as depth became a problem, a bigger problem as they got deeper into the postseason, and especially in Denver where the season ended for the Bills last January. But I'll say this, Igbinosun isn't just a backup guy. He's going to compete fully for a starting job and should. Physically, I think he's the only guy in that corner room who truly fits the bill of the kind of corner that you expect to be on the field for this Jim Leonhard aggressive 3-4 type scheme. It means a lot of contact, like we're seeing there at the line of scrimmage, rerouting receivers, getting hands on them, being physical. Now, he was a bit too handsy at times at Ohio State, got penalized for it. We'll see how he adjusts to the NFL game because, officiating styles are a little bit different. But Max Hairston's reaction is also interesting because he responded with, I think he said something like, "Let's work," when reporters asked him about it, and he said it was good that they've been studying together, working technique together, and I think Igbinosun also had IGB had a pick in one of the practices.
He did. I saw it. Yep. It was a good play. Sort of, you want to see that out of the rookies, especially playing with the confidence because in making those types of plays, because it indicates that they're sort of grasping what the concept of the defense is and able to play fast. And listen, Leonhard backed Hairston by saying that this pick didn't have as much to do with him, but he also didn't come out and just say Hairston's our starting corner and Igbinosun is working from behind him. And like you said, it feels like the physical traits of IGB lend itself more to him potentially being the guy playing alongside Benford.
Yeah, and not to necessarily dump on Hairston or say that was a bad choice, but it was a choice specific to a defense that's no longer here. Yeah. And smaller, quicker guy. How is he going to handle that physical stuff at the which you're asked to do in that press man type of style? He's going to be asked to do it because all the corners on this team have to be able to do that. It'll be interesting to see how he adjusts, and also, does he stay healthy?
Now, let's move to a different area of the defense. And then if there's one area the Bills have heavily invested in through the draft the past years, it's definitely on that defensive line. Day 2 picks each of the past 3 years. This year was T.J. Parker in the second. 2 years ago was Dwayne Carter in the third round. And then last year, obviously, they went heavy with T.J. Sanders. You had Deion Walker and Landon Jackson. So, Vic, putting Parker aside as a rookie and because he's a rookie, Walker was excellent as a rookie last year. It definitely feels like there's, I think, the opportunity for some other one of those day 2 picks to contribute, and the Bills might need one or two of those guys to contribute.
They definitely are going to need some contribution there. Look, the defensive front, to me, probably is the biggest question mark on this football team. And as it has been, we talked about Ed Oliver. What kind of impact is he going to have? But as we look at the players that they've acquired in Sanders, Carter, Jackson, you bring up those names. Deion Walker, of course, in this conversation of players that as you know, as they get another year in the league and another year on this team, have to show and produce and make an impact. I mean, Greg Rousseau, we talked about him at end. I know it's a different conversation, not a day two guy, but a guy who, let's see how he flourishes here. But here's the thing, he and anyone else on the perimeter of this D-line, the edge of this D-line, Jonathan, are going to only be as good as the people on the inside allow them to function. So I'm very much looking at that. And look, they were all, except for the people drafted this year, they were drafted for a different profile. Interesting to see the transition.
And I mean, you talk about Carter and Jackson specifically really putting on size. Leonard talking about Carter specifically maybe to allow him to play more in that nose tackle type role that they might be looking for this year.
Yep.
Landon Jackson looks like he's put on 15, 20 pounds.
Definitely.
Certainly maybe in the mold to play that outside linebacker
Set
position.
the edge.
It feels like really the only known commodities you have there are Bradley Chubb and Greg Rousseau to an extent, but you have Michael Hoyt who's coming off of injury. Right. You have TJ Parker who's a rookie. Landon Jackson, we didn't see much of him last year, so a lot of question marks in terms of who's getting after the quarterback, something that the Bills have been looking to address now for years.
Yeah, it's the conversation we have, all, if not annually, certainly weekly on these types of shows. But yeah, they have to get that production, and once and for all, look, Jim Leonard comes from the Denver Broncos. What did the Denver Broncos do as well as any team in the league on defense? Get after the quarterback.
Yeah, the Sabres offseason now fully setting in now. Coming up in the next block, our Paul Hamilton joins me to look at which Sabres can make sense as trade pieces this offseason, plus how those offseason plans could be shaped by all the young talent that the team has at forward. That's next on Sports Talk Live Buffalo Plus. Hey there, welcome back into Sports Talk Live Buffalo Plus. Paul Hamilton joining me now. And Paul, life may be a little bit slower for you right now. How are you enjoying these early days of the offseason?
Yeah, I've been off. Well, actually, today was my first day back, so I was off a little bit, took a little time off, had to catch up on my bills, you know, pay the service fees because I didn't get my bills paid. And it's like, well, it's been 14 years. I don't know how to do this, you know? Give me a break. Of course I didn't pay my bills. What's wrong with you people?
Life has a little bit different of a routine during playoff hockey as opposed to now being in the offseason. Certainly the Sabres wishing that they were actually playing right now in the Eastern Conference Finals. Instead, it's Montreal taking on Carolina. And Paul, things not looking so hot for the Canadiens team that beat the Sabres. They go and win game one against Carolina, but since then it's been all Hurricanes. Do you feel like the Sabres, who are certainly probably watching some of these games, do you feel like they're watching this thinking that they missed out on an opportunity here?
Yeah, and I think the Sabres may have made a mistake with the way they played Montreal in one sense. Hudson really kind of runs the Canadiens like Darlene does. Everything goes through Darlene for the Sabres. Everything goes through Hudson with Montreal. He killed the Sabres. In 7 games, he had 8 assists and just absolutely killed the Sabres. Rod Brindamore has decided we are going to beat on this kid. Mm-hmm. He's small. We are going to hit him, and we are going to hit him, and we are going to hit him to a point where he's always looking over his shoulder now. It's almost like he's playing scared because he's always looking to see who's going to hit him next. And that, I really think, is something the Sabres should have done. They should have been on him instead of letting him basically run wild on him. And if they could have eliminated him basically from the equation like Carolina has, we might be talking about a different thing. We might have been talking about a game in Buffalo last night instead of a game in Montreal because he absolutely killed the Sabres.
I think TNT before the game yesterday had a graphic where Hudson was essentially hit, I think, an average of 3 times per game in the previous 2 series. That's been doubled in this series against Carolina, about 6 times per game. But do you think the Sabres were built maybe to do to Hudson what the Hurricanes are doing to Hudson?
Well, they've got guys who are very capable of doing it. Mallenstein, Greenway, Tuck and Thompson get in on the forecheck now, and they act like power forwards. So, yeah, they have guys that definitely can do it. And I just think it was just a mistake that that wasn't their game plan. Because how many times during the season do we see people come after Rasmus Dahlin? Yeah. Bruins tried it, you know, in the first round, but, you know, the Sabres got through it. But teams are always coming after him and trying to hit him and trying to get him going. Now, it doesn't seem like Hudson is the hot streak, you know, the little bit of get a little hot-headed like Dahlin does. But still, I think that would have been a better way to handle him. And had they handled him better, they probably would have won the series.
Sabres certainly thinking about how things could have been different in that series. But as we start to look ahead to their offseason, obviously there's going to be some roster shuffling. Chris Johnston from The Athletic putting out his NHL offseason trade board, and 2 players in the Sabres organization making the top 25 in Michael Kesselring and Devin Levi. So, Paul, just your thoughts on the Sabres maybe moving one of them, potentially both of them, how much sense that would make for the team and for the players?
Yeah, that's no shock at all. I mean, if I were Devin Levi, now I have not spoken to him because I haven't been able to get to Rochester for a game with what the Sabres were doing, but the minute they claimed Ellis on waivers, I would have been calling the GM at the time. It was Kevin Adams, and I would have said, trade me. I obviously have no future here. I'm the third goalie. You just claimed a guy off waivers who had the same numbers in the AHL that I had last year. No, get me out of here. That's what I would have done. I don't know if Devin Levi did that, but the reporting around is that Levi wants out of Buffalo, and that would not shock me at all. Kesselring, I asked Jarmo Kekalainen about him, saying, does he still want to be a part of this? Because he talked about the conversations he's had with Kesselring, and there have been numerous ones. He talked about the conversations, but never said if Kesselring wants to still be a part of this. Because he, when was traded here, was going to be a top 4 defenseman. Well, Samuelsson became Samuelsson, and that ended. He's not going to be a top 4 defenseman unless there's an injury in Buffalo. So he either has to accept the role of being a 5-6, or maybe he would ask to be moved too if he can't accept that. And as I said, Jarmo really didn't answer the question if Kesselring still wants to be here. He did not speak to the media at the end of the year.
Right, and Doan, who came in over in that trade with Kesselring, obviously they're very good friends. I think he touched on how hard of a year this was for Kesselring to sort of accept and everything. And again, we talk about the depth of the Sabres defensemen, especially if they want to keep a guy like Byram long term. How much sense then does it make to keep a guy like Kesselring as your 5-6 when maybe you could better allocate those resources and that money to other positions on the
when
team?
He's Kesselring, if you have an injury in your top 4, he definitely can play it. It would have been very interesting because he had 3 injuries, and they just derailed his season. It would have been interesting had he not gotten hurt. What would have happened? What kind of opportunity would he have gotten coming out of training camp if he played like he's capable of playing? Because I'm telling you, he is a good defenseman. With Team USA, he was one of their better, if not the best defenseman they had at the Worlds. I had seen him play at Utah. He is a good defenseman when he's not injured. But near the end of the year, he wasn't injured, but he couldn't get in the lineup. Other guys were ahead of him. Metza and even Shen went in the lineup before him. So how much did he says, you know what? How much did he say to himself, you know what? Maybe it's time to move on. As I said, we didn't talk to him, so I don't know.
And one thing that's certainly going to have some impact on how the Sabres operate with Kesselring, Levi, and the rest of the team this offseason is all the young forward talent that they have, especially down the spine of the team, right? You have Konsta Helenius, who just scored today for Finland, excellent 2-on-1 with Alexander Barkov. Noah Ostlund, who we saw in these playoffs, and oh yeah, in case we forgot, Jiri Kulik, who was showing a ton of promise last year before those blood clots this year sort of cut his season short. So how do you think the Sabres need to operate and really take into consideration all these young guys that they have to or want to try to find a spot for next season?
I think all 3 of them are done in Rochester. Now, it seemed to me like Helenius and Ostlund can play wing or center. It seems like Kulik is pretty much a center. When he was down in Rochester, he played some wing. But once they put him at center, he really blossomed. And he has improved his defensive game quite a bit. Lindy Ruff talked about it, where at the end of last year, he was really, really good. But one of the reasons is his defensive game improved. He was playing with Benson and Thompson, and they were a good line together. So, yeah, since we didn't see Kulik a lot, we didn't talk about him a lot, but he's a big part of this team also as a young player. But as I said, I think he needs to be a centerman. The other 2, wing center, I don't think it much matters.
And Helenius, we didn't see a ton of him in the regular season, but based off what we saw from him in the playoffs and what we're seeing from him now with Finland, he feels like a guy, that really every Sabres fan, the city of Buffalo, is really excited about going into next year.
I remember when he was drafted, the people who are up on those players and see them a lot said the Sabres got a steal. They didn't think he should have lasted as long as he did. There were defensemen in that draft with other teams wanted, and that's how he dropped. So even on draft day, they said Buffalo got a steal, and I think we just got a little taste of it. And they were a little apprehensive, kind of as I was too, but they just said, you know what, let's put him in.
And the trait that has stuck out from his play, and even from the words of his teammates, the confidence that Helen Hughes is playing with at such a young age. And we can't forget NHL draft just about a month away right here in Buffalo. But coming up in the next block, it's back to football. And Joe Schoen getting an extension in New York. We bring back Vic Carucci for his thoughts on the Giants general manager next on Sports Talk Live Buffalo Plus. Welcome back into Sports Talk Live Buffalo Plus. Vic joining me back again. And Vic, not a whole ton of news outside of OTAs really going on this time of year, but we did find out a name very familiar to Bills fans is actually getting an extension in New York. Joe Schoen staying with the Giants as their GM as he now goes from working with Brian Daboll now to the John Harbaugh era in New York, the Meadowlands and everything. So just kind of your initial reaction to seeing that deal done, because I'm sure that's not a move that everyone was expecting the Giants to make.
This is fascinating if you really want to break it down. I mean, interesting here because of the Buffalo connection with Joe Schoen, but league-wide, this got a lot of attention because there was full expectation that Joe Schoen would be on his way out once Jim Harbaugh took over. Make no mistake, Jim Harbaugh is the football czar of the Giants organization. I mean, and rightfully so. He comes in with his cachet, Super Bowl ring, all the accomplishment of making the Ravens a very strong program for many years. And to some degree, there are those who still question why he was fired by the Ravens and became available, but the Giants snatch him up. And essentially, from what I understood, everything that anything that he wants for that organization, he gets. Well, he wanted Joe Schoen. I think Joe Schoen also had a chance to audition for John Harbaugh. I don't think John knew a ton about him, but he auditioned for him, through the draft, through free agency, and showed Harbaugh exactly the kind of competence he has.
And quickly, I mean, you touched on the draft. How much do you think sort of the promising young pieces that the Giants have in the organization through Shane's drafting, like Malik Neighbors, like Jackson Dart? I mean, you have Abdul Carter and Arvell Reese now in the team. How much do you think that played a part in this?
I think it played a part, but I also think the whole big picture story of Joe Schoen did too. This is a guy who worked his way up from internship with the Carolina Panthers, where Brandon Beane became quite familiar with him, and just showed himself to be an extremely intelligent, knowledgeable, and highly likable, approachable person. John Harbaugh likes having this guy in the next office.
That's right. The Giants such a fascinating team, right? Because you feel like they have the pieces to sort of be one of those surprise teams this upcoming season, where go from being maybe bottom of the league, picking in the top 10, to potentially making a playoff push. They have some respectability now with Harbaugh in the head coaching seat. Now can he sort of help get this team into the playoffs, right?
There's no doubt, and I think it's a fairly open division, somewhat.
Right.
We'll see where it goes, but I think the Giants have a pretty good chance to elevate themselves.
We'll be looking also elsewhere in that division to see if A.J. Brown is on the move once June 1st hits to
Yes.
Lincoln. Thanks for tuning into this edition of Sports Talk Live Buffalo Plus. You can catch this episode on our YouTube page. We will be back next week for another episode. Thanks for tuning in.